Hey everybody, this is Nate with Nonessential Media. Welcome you back to another episode of We the Fandom. Just a heads up, while we keep this show's topics fairly clean, we do record this show in an improvisational style. So if you plan to listen to the show in a work setting or around small children, just a heads up, this might get a little crazy. Thanks for joining us on this episode. If you're tuning in next week, it's going to be our retcon episode. We're going to be doing the Santa Claus 3, which will be very interesting. It's our holiday special. It should be coming out the Sunday after the holiday. We'll see you guys then. Have a good one. Everybody, welcome back for another episode of We the Fandom. Just as always, this is Nate. Joining me is
Cheyenne.
Alright, this time, it's time for the ultimate battle. You've seen Freddy vs. Jason. You've been told the tales of aliens versus predators. Now, the ultimate matchup. Who will win?
Books versus movies. And this is going to be probably one of those ones where there might be some fighting involved.
Yeah, there might be.
Not physical.
Oh. I'll put the gloves away.
That's probably a good idea because we both know that between us, Nate...
You would win.
I would win. Exactly. I might be small, but I am a scrappy little shit.
I'm soft in too many places.
Short people are nothing but rage.
From all those shelves, they couldn't reach. It builds up over time.
Having to climb on all those counters and shelves, damn it.
Anybody have a stepladder?
No.
Why is there not a stepladder?
No. You get really good climbing on ladders, using shelves as jumping points. I cannot tell you how many times I have, stepped on a bottom shelf and, launched upward to grab something from the top shelf at grocery stores, which I know you're not supposed to do, but I do it anyways. So, it's one of those days, man.
Just think of every shelf I've seen that couldn't support the weight of the product that was supposed to be on it, and you're just yeeting yourself off of them.
Basically, yes. I'm like, there's no way this thing should be able to support my weight, but I'm doing it anyways.
But it's gonna. So we're going to do this one a little differently than how we do our normal episodes where we talk about our favorite examples, because this is going to be more about pairings and deciding what's...
comparing and contrasting. We are being a Venn diagram today.
So I was thinking we'd break it down by picking... first off, titles where the book is clearly the superior.
Okay.
And then afterwards, we could flip the script, talk about any cases where the movie was better than the book. And then we can round it off with any books or adaptations that are so wildly different that it's not fair to compare the two. And then
we are literally being a Venn diagram today.
We are.
The good, the bad, and the stuff in the middle that works from both sides.
And then I thought we'd wrap it up with pitching a story or a book that we love that has currently either has been filmed or has been deemed unfilmable.
All right.
If anything comes out of it. I have a couple examples, but
okay.
We'll see. Starting with books that are clearly better than the movies based on them. I've got 3 examples. Do you have any you want to start with, or do you want me to pick one off the top?
I mean, I've mentioned this many times before. I'm not sure if I have in the podcast. I probably have, because it's been it's been like a decade and I'm still not over it.
We're 7 episodes in. It might come up.
Aragon.
Yes. Terrible movie.
Oh my god.
Absolutely.
Don't even... except I can start on it this time. Thank goodness.
This is your
Okay.
platform.
Okay.
For those of you not interested in Aragon, please skip forward to minute 20. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, so I read these books in middle school. Okay, so we had this assembly talking about how, like,
dragons are cool.
I wish. It was a different author talking about, like, the cover of their book and, like, some different covers of books and, like, how you can say you don't judge a book by its cover, but everybody knows we judge books by the cover.
Isn't that kind of the point? Like, the cover's supposed to grab your attention.
Exactly. So, like, it grabs my attention. I look at the back and then see if I actually want to read it. Yeah. Like, it's supposed to. So, and it was the original cover, since I think they've gone through some changes with the Aragon.
Is it the one with the blue with her?
Yes. Yeah, it's the blue, and, like, it was that one and another one, and literally everybody in the gymnasium for that assembly don't even remember what the book was, let me tell you. But I still remember, like, everybody wanted to read Aragon. Why? Because it had a dragon on it.
Dragons are cool.
So eventually I did read it. I fell in love. Christopher Poloni started writing it when he was young, but it's a very well-written story. It's like that perfect amount of detail, but there's so much backstory to it. And, I mean, especially in the first one, it's hinted at, and you get tidbits, but it's not everything that it could be. We get that more in the second one. But they ruined it. In this way that, the way I describe it when I talk about it, is that they took the book behind a shed. They hatcheted it into lots of tiny pieces. And they put some of the pieces out and decided to make a movie off of those teeny tiny pieces. So in the book, there's a lot of storytelling. We get a lot of information about, dragon riders, about the magic that is inherent in this world, but is only accessible to some people. Mm-hmm. We get a lot of, there's a lot of interesting plot points, and one of the things that always bugged me was that Aragon was made to seem much poorer. Him and his uncle and his cousin were made to seem much poorer than they actually were. They live in, like, this, like, lean-to hut kind of thing. It's not even, like, in the book they live in a barn, they plow the fields, or they live in a house, they have a barn, they work these fields. Like, they're very, they live outside of town, but they're very good farmers. Yeah. And his cousin goes off because he's trying to earn up the, points, essentially. Like, he's trying to make a reputation for himself so he can propose to this girl in town. But he's, like, he's a big figure in the original book, because then later on, he's also a huge...
And he comes back as, like, a seasoned warrior or something like that, right? So
he gets there. Yeah. Yes, he gets there, because in the second book, he rallies together their entire village and gets them to, like, forage over the mountains, separating them from the coast. But there's so much more detail in the books. The only good part about it was how well they did Saphira. Honestly. Because in the book there are dwarves. No dwarves. I even checked the credits. One of the dwarves was apparently supposed to be in it, but it's supposed to be this, like, tall, like, ginger dude. And I'm just like, that is not a dwarf, guys. You're not supposed to find out that Arya is a princess of the elves until the second book, when she meets her mother again. And when Aragon meets the queen of the elves. You're not supposed to get that information, and that kind of ruins this arc of, like, who she is. Brom, I love the actor who played Brom. He's supposed to be an older dude, but I was okay with that. But you're supposed to meet, there's this whole other race of beings that you don't even get to meet. So Solemnbaum is the one who's supposed to give Aragorn his, the telling of his future, and which they also butchered that. But you never meet Solemnbaum, and Solemnbaum is a werecat. So he is both.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, he is both human and a cat. And the town where they're supposed to go is supposed to be this huge, like, port town. This huge port town. It's literally just huts on water, because that port town comes into play later when you meet, because you meet one of Brom's old buddies from when they were in war with when the king first took over. They knew each other then, and all of this information that you have but isn't present in the books, because that friend of Brom's is important. Or yeah, in the movie. That friend of Brom's is important in the second, and has to do with his cousin later on. Like, there's just so much detail. And yeah, I get it. You can't get all that detail, but
that's fair. You have to adapt. But
right.
There's a good adaptation, and then there's poor adaptation.
Like I said, they hatcheted it into tiny pieces, and then, you can
look at, like, successful fantasy franchises.
There were plenty of them. Yeah, Lord of the Rings comes to mind.
Or like Harry Potter, where they had to leave details out.
Right,
but they honored the heart and, like, the main story of the novel.
And they didn't.
No.
You don't get several entire races, you don't get some of the depth and the political play that's going on, because that, especially when Aragorn and Saphira get to the Varden, the resistance, that is a huge, like, the politics of it is huge, even in the first book. There's a lot of politics at play, especially between, like, the Varden and the dwarves who are housing the Varden inside their mountain. There's a lot of that in play, and they leave it out. They leave out just so many details that's why they never made further on the series, and why I will always read that book before I wouldn't touch that movie with a 30-foot pole.
35 feet, though. So,
oh, no.
Okay. I tried. Producers of Aragon, I tried. See, I have a film that I am as passionate about them completely missing the point of the story.
Seriously, yeah.
Can you tell what it is? It's Will Smith's I Am Legend. So, spoiler alert, for those of you who haven't read or watched any of the far better adaptations, like, I think one of them was called, like, The Omega Man or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the whole point of the story is that Robert Neville is the last human alive in New York City, and everyone else has been essentially become vampires.
Oh.
In the book, it's more obvious that they're vampires. The movie kind of plays it around because it came out around the same time as the biological zombies and that kind of thing. But even the movie makes it pretty obvious when you think, like, oh, they can't come out in the sunlight. Vampires. But anyway, throughout the book, we see Robert views them as monsters. He's trying to help them, but the more time he spends, the more and more he's losing hope, and he's just trying to survive on his own. And the first part of the movie felt like a great adaptation of that. I was like, yeah, it's him, it's the dog, it's great. And then they ruined it the moment they introduced, I can't remember the name of the character, but the woman he meets.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That happens in the book as well. But that's one of the first twists of the book is he meets her, he can tell she's not a vampire because he meets her in the sunlight, but there's something off and he doesn't trust her, and it is revealed indeed she is a vampire. She's just adapting to the sunlight.
Okay.
But she's not savage. She's conscious. She's intelligent. And she's essentially sent as a spy to keep an eye on him.
Okay.
That not all vampires are these, vicious, unintelligent monsters that he's been facing.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has a confrontation from her, and she ends up fleeing, and then he doubles down on his extermination of them.
Okay.
Going like house to house, just killing them, right? No longer trying to save them, nothing like that. It's just them versus me kind of deal. And at the very end of the book, he gets captured. They have like a whole raid where they break into his house.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar to how it happens in the movie. And then he's taken to their court underground.
Mm-hmm.
And the final bit of the movie, which explains the title, is him being passed on them for murder. And he looks out on this sea of vampires, and he's like, who are afraid of him. And he's like, to them, I am legend.
Oh, okay.
And the whole bit is it's a reversal of like, he's the monster.
Right.
And the vampires are just trying to live.
Right. They're just trying to do their thing.
And the movie somehow doesn't understand the point of the book.
Right.
Instead, it's like, I'm a legend because I saved everyone from being a vampire. I'm like, that's not what the book's about. Not only do they not have the twist that the woman is a vampire.
Right.
She's just a regular woman.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in the theater watching this just like, what? Like,
yeah.
looking around, everybody else watching the movie like, did you read the book? Did you read the book? It's not even a book, it's a short story. I was like, did you read the story? Did you read the story? No? This is weird. But I'm like, even then, I'm like, maybe they're going to turn it around.
Right.
Right? Maybe she'll get infected, and then we'll see that she's still conscious or something, right?
Right.
No, they go through the whole ending where he sacrificed himself. He walks out of there, Robert Neville's a hero.
Right.
And it's like, no, he's not. He is. It is a fair claim that Robert Neville's a monster, especially towards the end of the story, when he's just indiscriminately hunting and murdering vampires.
Right.
Not because they're threatening them. He's literally breaking into homes they're sleeping in and killing them.
Right.
He's a bad guy. But he was a good man pushed to the point of being a bad guy just by the circumstance. And so you can empathize with him, but he is a villain. And it's like the movie just completely doesn't understand that. And I feel so bad for anyone who like watched the movie and was like, what a cool story. I'm going to go read that book. And then buys the cover with Will Smith and the dog on it. And are reading the book and they're just like, what? Not only is this is only a tiny part of that book because the rest of it's the rest of his short stories. But B, it doesn't follow along with the movie at all. Like, as soon as you get to the part where the woman is introduced, they just into two separate paths.
Right.
Two completely different stories. And I remember walking out of that movie and complaining to my my stepdad, because I think I was a preteen or something like that when that movie came out, so I wasn't driving yet. So
yeah, it was...
I had him take me to the movie. It was like 2007 or something, if I recall.
Something like that, yeah.
I was not yet old enough to drive. Late, like early teens, not preteen.
Right.
16, 17. And just, he was so upset, not because of his opinion of the movie, because I wouldn't shut up about how much that movie pissed me off, because they completely missed the point. You know, it's not like Ender's Game, I didn't like the movie adaptation of, because I feel like it just didn't do a good enough job telling that story.
Right.
But they didn't, like, change the story at the very end where they're like, great job, kid. Good job in all those simulations. Now let's go do the real thing, right? They kept the twist. Spoilers if you haven't heard our other episode where we talk about Ender's Game. They kept the twist that in the end, the simulation was real.
Right.
And they really were, he really did just exterminate an entire species.
Right.
It would be like that level of just like, what? Like, and I, to this day, can't imagine who pitched that idea, because I would have walked off the set if I was adapting that story and they're like, what if we don't do the story? What if we take the story and ignore the whole point?
Right.
The title doesn't make sense anymore. I Am Legend. Because you made a cure? I mean, I guess. But, like, you could easily swap that with I'm a good doctor. And it would have the same effect. Versus I Am Legend makes sense because vampires are legendary creatures of legend.
Right.
It makes sense to be like, I am the equivalent to them, what they were once the equivalent to us.
Right. Now, I'm the one that you're gonna tell your children to make them go to sleep at night.
Like, that's the revelation that, he's about to die. But for generations of these things to come, they will remember him.
His story will go on.
Do you remember the human who used to break into our homes during the daylight and murder us?
If you don't listen to your mother and father, Robert Neville is going to come and murder you.
Finish drinking your dinner.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, it's just missing the point is really the reason why we have the issues. It's not... because you can do a story and not live up to our expectations, but it still can be a good story. But when you just butcher everything, where you don't even go with, like, the general gist of it anymore, you're just...
It's sort of like if you're driving, you're just like, oh, what's over here? Like,
right, yeah. You're not even off-roading. You're just, like...
into a bush, like...
Right, you're just, like, destroying your car.
Let's transition. Let's play devil's advocate. Let's talk about some movies that were better than the books they're based on. I have one.
That's good, because I can't think of any.
It's going to be controversial.
Oh, gosh.
Jurassic Park.
Okay.
This is actually the least controversial of my
I was going to say, that's not that controversial, because...
Not just because of the massive popularity.
No, but because, like, they're actually good stories.
Yes. Well, I'm just talking about the first one in particular.
Okay.
So Michael Crichton wrote the novel before the movie came out. The movie chose not to follow some of the decisions, including some of the characters who died off. Right. When Michael Crichton, that's for some reason hard to say, was approached to write a sequel for Jurassic Park so that they had something to base the Lost World off of. Right. He went with the changes the movie made in his book. He was not obligated to follow. Like, but he enjoyed it. Like, that's a good thing when even the writer of the original material is like, I like your decision making. Like, I didn't think of that. That's a better decision. Let's go with that. The very beginning of The Lost World is an explanation on how Dr. Ian Malcolm is alive. Right. Because in the book, he died. He pretty clearly died. Right. And so he had to walk it back so that he could be the main character in the next book. Right. And I remember reading Jurassic Park as a teenager, because I grew up and I loved the movie. How could you not? And it's just a better story. I think Spielberg tells that story better than Crichton does in the novel. The novel gets into way too many details, like things that I don't really didn't know. It's not I didn't love Jurassic Park because I loved the science of how the dinosaurs came back. Right. So that's not what I wanted more detail on, but that's what we got. Okay. And that makes sense with Crichton, because I read some of his other books, or at least a couple of them I attempted and then put down, because that's sort of the trend of a writer. He's going to explain how and why things are the way they are in their books. And I wasn't looking for that from Jurassic Park. I just wanted dino DNA. I wanted more dinosaurs. I wanted more action. You didn't want 3 pages of an explanation of the street that the people live on in Pet Sematary? Oh, it wasn't more. Oh, okay, in that case. I was going to say, like, it was more than 3. It was chapters long of jargon explaining how the dinosaurs exist. And I'm just like, I don't care. Right, and that's why I will just stick to Stephen King novel, or to movies and not his novels, because you can be a little long-winded when describing things. Yeah. That's why I'll just stick with Eyes of the Dragon, which is a good one. Yeah. But it's slim on the like, you get enough details to get what you want,
without having to deal with 2 to 3 pages of the description of the street that the family lives on in Pet Cemetery.
I started the audiobook for Dr. Sleep before the movie came out.
Right.
I stopped listening to it at one point because the beginning chapter is just him, like, talking about what Wendy and Danny and oh my goodness, what's the gentleman who worked for the Overlook?
Oh my! I never remember his name, but I know who you're talking about.
Like, what they're up to.
Okay.
And I'm like 30 minutes into it, and you can tell it's just like it's not necessary information to the story, and I'm just like, I'll come back to that later. And I've listened to 3 audiobooks since then. I have not gone back to it. It is sitting in my queue of like half listened to books.
Right.
And it's just like someday I will listen to that.
Right.
No,
I
paid for it. But it is not today.
Right. And yeah, it's just sometimes there's just too much minor detail that we don't care about. I've seen when talking about writing, like 50% detail, 50% the reader's imagination, and I'm like, yes. Like, you want to leave things out.
Spiraling out of that, I have a more controversial answer, but going into that same exact reason, and that is the Lord of the Rings novels versus the Lord of the Rings films.
I mean,
I love the story. I love the grand scale, the characters. It's all beautiful. And I'm eternally grateful to Tolkien for it.
All the detail.
It's like, why do I need to know these little things?
He was world building.
And I get it. And I love it because it's great to see someone else take that information.
Right.
And able to convey that without having me have to stare at a screen while a wall of text goes up. Because it's fascinating to get hints of that in the movies.
Right.
But it has the right amount of like background information it needs to. Because it's not really relevant.
At this moment.
Yeah.
It might be relevant later.
True.
There might be something that we can pick up on later, but we don't need it right now.
Yeah.
And so, including it is redundant and mostly just annoying.
One of the reasons why I've never sat down and I've read, like, the expanded Silmarillion and some of the other, short stories. Because it's just like, I can't handle any more than what I've already had to deal with.
Right.
It's just like, there's a part, I think, where, like, it goes into this really lengthy description, like, of how Sam cooks rabbit or something like that. And it's just like, I don't. You can do the same thing with, and Sam prepared a nice rabbit dinner. Moving on.
Right, yeah. No, that's...
I don't mean to sound like I'm coming across really harsh or anything. At the same time, it's so much to process.
Right.
Like, I don't want to discredit him.
It's like a filler episode of a TV show.
Yeah.
That you can do without.
It's like, you could skip it and still be fine in the story.
Right.
And I get it. Get it.
It's like when Hemingway used to have to write so many words, like he got paid by the word kind of situation. So you get a lot more words than you need. So yeah, no, I understand completely on that.
And then my last one is, do androids dream of electric sheep versus Blade Runner?
Okay.
I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. It is a boring short story. It is very boring. It is not super interesting. It's very much more about like married life than I expected.
Okay.
Because like his wife wants to buy an electric, like it's something about in the future owning animals is more of a big deal.
Okay.
But like owning a live animal means like you are wealthy.
Okay.
Which is and so it's like his wife wants him to buy an electric sheep because like that'll show how up and coming they are.
Okay.
And so it makes a little more sense with the title.
Yes.
It's the fish tank, but it sounds like she's like someone's peeing. Yes, we're recording right now. Hello.
Hi.
So it makes more sense with the title.
Right.
Which is why I'm glad they changed it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have made any sense with that movie.
Nope.
It's the idea that he's like, I have to hunt down these robots so I can buy my wife this stupid electric sheep that she wants. Do these androids I'm murdering, do they dream like I do? Are they themselves struggling so that they can buy their spouses electric sheep? And it's just like, what?
Yeah.
It's like the little...
And then I wonder how that got to the movie...
Blade Runner.
Yeah, that's an... That's an interesting adaptation.
Yeah, but I think it took the best parts of that story, which is hunting replicants.
Right.
And the whole, like, are these people any different than I am?
Right.
And make that into a better story by focusing more on it.
Right.
Versus this whole, like, it almost reminds me of, I remember reading Fahrenheit 451.
Okay.
And it's the whole, like, he's a firefighter who starts fires to burn books.
Mm-hmm.
Solid. Understand it. And then there's just, like, paragraphs where it goes into, like, this whole side bit where the wife has these, like, weird 3D interactive wall televisions where it's like, it's a, you're watching a show, but you're supposed to pretend that you're in the show. And so, like, you have a script and all the characters stop and wait for your character to say your line before the script keeps going.
Oh my.
And the wife is, like, addicted to it.
Uh-huh.
And so she's constantly wearing this, like, VR headset, essentially, and interacting with these characters, but none of it's real.
Okay.
And it's just like, this doesn't really tie into... I get what you're trying to say, like, instead of, like, being interested in knowledge and information...
Right.
She's too distracted with this dumb show thing.
With the technology.
Yeah. But, like, that doesn't really go anywhere. Like, it's just, you just wasted my time reading about this.
Right.
But it's not like she, like, takes off the helmet after having a conversation with her husband and she's like, you're right. Like, I don't need this anymore.
It doesn't actually feed into development.
Sure at the very end of the story, he goes on the run and leaves her. Like, at the very end of the story, he finds, like, a commune of people who dedicate themselves to each memorizing a single book.
Okay.
So that it could be passed on to the future.
Mm-hmm.
Which, boy, that's a lot of pressure to make sure you don't fuck up a line by accident. Right? Your job is to remember, you know, all of Hamlet, and you're just like, fuck. Like, and yeah, like, the wife is never brought up again. So, like, we don't know, like, is she still watching those weird interactive programs, or did she eventually be like, I wonder what my husband was?
I was gonna say, if we had more information about what happened with her, like, did she ever notice that her husband had left?
I think, if I'm recalling the story right, she eventually confronts him because she realizes he's hiding something and finds out about the books that way. But she's not supportive of him. She's like, oh my God, like, we're all gonna go to jail. Like, what are you doing? And yeah, he's just like, later, like, I'm gonna go live in the woods with all these people, bye! Like, it's been years since I read it, so it's very possible I'm missing things. But that's how I remember it.
Right.
It's just kind of like, why did I read all this information about how, because, like, he gets really descriptive on, like, how the TV works.
Okay.
And, like, and it's clearly the way he's writing it, the way you read it, where it's like, he's writing it with such disdain, or it's just like, ugh, like, this thing is awful. Wouldn't you rather have a nice book? Right.
Yeah, and again...
Which, how ironic that his story has been made into, like, TV and film. Right. The only thing that would make it better if they adapted it into a video game, and so it was actually interactive, then it would be perfect. The most perfect irony you couldn't ask for. Yeah, but that reminds me of the picture of Dorian Gray. Mm-hmm. There's literally this entire chapter
where it's just him, where it's Dorian Gray describing in great detail the things he's become obsessed with since he's just kind of living forever, including, like, fabric. And let me tell you, I did not finish reading that chapter. I, like, skipped to the next chapter.
Still fabric, even more fabric, and it's pages, just like still fabric,
like fabric and paper and like the weird things he became obsessed with because he didn't have anything else to do with himself, you know. So it's just like, yeah, there are times where the books are the movies are better simply because we don't have to deal with the really boring details of things. Because, I mean, some detail is good, but too much makes us want to just skip it.
Like, well, what is he interested in while he's, essentially immortal?
Right.
Like, but you don't need an entire chapter talking about fabric.
Exactly. Yes, and that's why I've only ever read one Stephen King book from beginning to end, and it wasn't even one of his horrors. And it's just... there are things that, I mean, I'm an avid reader. I love reading things. But there's still a limit to what one person can deal with in detail.
I gotta work in like 12 hours. Why am I sitting here reading a chapter on,
Right. Why am I reading 40 pages of something that has no bearing on the overall story?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and that's why, like, the points you made, it makes sense. I understand where you're coming from with that.
So let's talk about books and movies, or books in some other form of adaptation, that are so different, there's no point in comparing them to each other. To me, the most obvious one is Kubrick's The Shining versus King's The Shining.
Right.
While they both tell essentially the same story, there are so many minor differences, and director versus writer choices that in the end you're essentially trying to debate one person's vision versus another.
Right.
Sort of like if two people read a story at the same time and then were asked to adapt it. Only one is the guy who wrote the first one and the guy who read it went, I like this. But I like both versions. Mm-hmm. I've read The Shining all the way through. I've watched Kubrick's film a lot. It's hard for me to say which one is superior.
Okay.
I'm not going to get into that argument just because I really don't have an opinion on the argument. I really love Kubrick's vision. I love his detail, how he can just let this quiet suspense and horror build.
Right.
Does a great service to that story.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he made choices to not include things that were in Stephen King's version,
mm-hmm.
That play more into the supernatural side of it. You almost could watch all of Kubrick's version and just dismiss the supernatural as just like, well, that's just Danny being an imaginative child.
Right.
You really could.
Or Jack just
being insane.
Right.
Yeah, like
he's a schizophrenic kind of situation going on or something.
There's only a couple things, like when he gets let out of the
freezer or pantry or like whatever it was.
Or whatever it was. Yeah, because it wasn't cold. He was just stuck there. He won't be cold till later. But like that's the only time where something obviously supernatural that we cannot say is him having a hallucination really happens. Because we don't see Wendy really witnessing anything.
Right.
Until the very end where she's clearly freaking out and now seeing things.
Right. But it's also subtle that for the most part, a small child's imagination.
Yeah. A man's mental illness.
Yeah.
An old man who's just a dick to children and is like, I can read your mind.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Versus the novel. It's very clearly a combination of, yes, Jack is an alcoholic,
But that's not all there is to it.
But there is something going on here. And there's even parts in the book where it's pretty much stated that, like, he's not, like, in the movie, Jack Nicholson's character. Now I can't remember the actual character I keep wanting to call him Jack, but I don't think that's the name of...
Jack Torrance.
Oh, it is Jack.
Yes.
Well, that's really good casting. Either that or they're like, why don't we hire someone whose name is already Jack? It's sort of like stated that Jack's a good man he had a problem drinking, but he got pushed too far because of the supernatural.
Right.
The ending of the novel is Jack realizing the boiler, which doesn't come up, I don't think, in the movie at all.
It does not.
The boiler has been allowed to build up for too long.
Right.
And so, oddly heroically, he runs in an attempt to stop it from exploding and just isn't fast enough and dies when the hotel explodes.
Right. But in the movie, there's kind of some... they don't overtly say some covert and some subtle, like, implications that while he, like, especially when he's drunk, but that he's, like, violent towards his family. He's not a good person to start with. So, yeah, that is a very...
It's kind of, they just don't... You can only compare them together as far as, like, plot-wise.
Right. And even then, only general.
Yeah, but in the end, they're two separate products under the exact same name.
Right.
The other one I have 3 in total that I picked out. The second one is Starship Troopers versus Starship Troopers. Because the movie is so tongue-in-cheek and over the top, and it's practically making a joke out of what the book takes seriously.
Okay.
The book has long-winded, I think I mentioned this on a previous episode, but like long-winded discussions about like what it means to be a citizen, what it truly means, like what your responsibility should be as a citizen of a nation, to the point where I, reading it as a young man, stopped and honestly thought about what he was saying, whether I agreed to it or not.
Right.
Versus... like, Starship Troopers is a dumb, like, turn your brain off and laugh, like, would you like to know more?
Oh my god, that is...
My favorite part of that movie is one of those, like, infomercial, whatever you want to call them, where they're, like, showing, like, all the kids on Earth are excited about the invasion of Klindathu, and their kids are stomping on the bugs, and the mom's, like, hysterically, like, ah! And it's just like, what the fuck? Or the part where the kids are giving, like, a fully loaded assault rifle to the children.
Right.
And it's this huge fucking gun.
With, like, a 5-year-old.
Yeah, and they're all like, ha, 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 ha. And it's so over the top ridiculous.
It really, really
and it's
is.
just like, why? It's like one of those situations where someone's like, please, we need someone to make this movie. We've already signed off on it. And they go, I'll only make the movie if I get to make the movie making fun of what the movie's about.
Yeah,
and they're so desperate, they're just like, deal!
Yeah, no, I had to watch that movie many, many times because of my younger brothers when we were younger. It was...
That's a weird movie to watch with your siblings.
We watched a lot of weird movies, okay? I mean, I
can't judge you too much. One of the most popular films in my household, at least when my stepdad had control of the TV, was Red Dawn with the kill counter on.
Oh my god.
So the entire film, you could count exactly up to that point how many people had been killed by how. It would be like, this many people have died due to gunshot. This many people have died due to explosions. This many people have died due to RPGs. Or like, and it would, like, as the movie progressed, count every kill. And I just remember watching this as a kid and being like, something seems off about this.
Yeah, no, we watched a lot of things.
Don't get me wrong.
Horror movies.
I enjoyed it, but it was wrong.
Yeah, we watched, like, there was just so many movies that were inappropriate for children.
When you said that, you look like you were having like flashbacks. Like, I want to take just, like, superimpose, like make like a picture of you a little translucent, and then superimpose, like, images of, like, Vietnam behind you. Just the sounds of the helicopters in the background, like.
Basically, no, so we watched a lot of horror movies and just things that children should not have been watching. Like, I mean, we're talking the violent horror movies, too. Like, we're talking things that really qualify as slashers kind of thing. Those were the movies I grew up watching. Which is why it's so hard for me to find a scary movie that's actually scary. Because my stepdad was the kind of guy that he was a smoker, so he would go outside, and our couch was up against the windows, so he'd go outside and he'd wait. He'd wait for the right spot and then pound on the window, so, like, scaring the bejesus out of me and my younger brother at the time. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, we watched Starship Troopers, and I mean, my younger brother, and then eventually my youngest loved it. I mean, it's basically just guys shooting at
bugs.
Yeah, is really what great. They saw.
You kind of missed the whole, like, they invade the planet and then can lose,
right? So yeah, there was a lot of that. So I get it.
Yes, no. My last one is of a film I'm sure most people don't even remember came out. It was Russell Crowe in a little blockbuster called Noah, and that's versus the actual Bible.
Oh my god. There was a movie about that, wasn't there?
And it had almost nothing to do with the actual story from the Bible.
You mean the one where he literally is building a ship?
Yeah. I will say, he does build a ship in the movie.
Okay.
But every little thing else that happens in that movie has nothing to do with Noah.
Oh, good
They tried to turn Noah into, like, the next action star, and it's like, no.
Oh my god,
why?
What?
Yeah. I remember, like friends of mine and people I knew who were religious who were like, yeah, we're going to go see the Noah movie. They got Russell Crowe to play, in a Christian movie. Isn't that exciting? And then thinking of them after the movie, like, was it good? And they're like, no, it was bad. Like, Christians honestly offended. Like, did you not read the story it came from? Like,
I mean, seriously, that's one of those things that should be really hard to mess up, but apparently wasn't.
Yeah. Guy builds a boat. Animals get on the boat. People have made adaptations of that story for Sunday school for years.
Rain floods the earth.
Yeah, for generations.
But the people in the boat are okay. Like, that's literally the premise. Yeah. And then, like, after 40 days...
There's, like, a weird, like, civil war where, like, Noah's telling people, like, the flood's coming. We gotta, like, be better people. And instead they're like, nah, we're gonna be bad people. And we're gonna kill you, Noah. We're gonna take your boat.
Oh my god!
And then, so it's like, what? Like, and then like all of his adult sons have to get wives, and I'm just like, ooh, no, that's not why.
Yeah.
It's just oof. Why does this exist? Like, Evan Almighty was a better adaptation of
I was
Noah
gonna say
than Noah was. Terrible.
That is a really bad endorsement. Like, that's a very accurate, that must be a very accurate endorsement of how bad that movie was.
Just awful. I can't remember what reason I finally watched it after hearing people tell me it was bad, but they were not wrong. It was a terrible movie.
All right, so that was yours, right?
That was mine as far as movies that are so different from their book inspiration that they cannot be compared at all.
Okay, so I have a couple myself.
All right.
So first we are going to start with The Umbrella Academy.
Okay, yes.
I've read the comics. I enjoyed the comics. They're dark and gritty and like, but not too dark and gritty. Like, we're not going DC
angsty,
level. Sorry if you can't tell. I don't like. I'm not a big DC fan.
The DCEU.
Yeah, it's not like the Christian Bale
no,
Batman's.
That's not what it actually is called. Oh my goodness, I don't. The term they picked for the DC animated universe.
Oh gosh,
it has a really dumb initial. I can't.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Again, like I said, if you can't tell, I'm not a DC fan, which is hilarious considering my next choice is
DCAU is the animated universe,
right? But yeah, it's not overly gritty. You get fun parts, but there are some really dark parts too. I'm looking at the part where she loses her, the one chick loses her voice.
Yes.
And this is in the
twist.
Oh, it's a lot darker in the actual. So, in the comics. But, like, you get this whole, like, there's a lot of darker things going on. But in the Netflix series, the thing I enjoyed was that there was more story. Like, there's more interesting things, like, your bad guy in that first one when they're, with, the white violin, it's interesting. It's way more, there's more detail to it. And it makes for, like, both are very good, both are valid versions of it, but they're very, like you said, they're very different. They can't really be compared. There's a lot of different things about it, and it was good because of that. Did you find it?
Side tangent. This might not be correct. Let me know. Tweet at me if I'm wrong. But from my quick Googling, I think it's DCCU, which is hysterical because spelled out, that would be Detective Comics Universe. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the actual official name is very close to that. The word
wouldn't
comics
doubt
is
it.
Twice in it. And it's like, what? Like,
well, it's like the Los Angeles Angels are the Angels. Are the Angels. So, but yeah, just...
Wouldn't it be the Lost? It would be the Angels.
Yes, basically.
It was like the Angels of Angels sounds impressive. Like these are these are the archangels. Like,
but they're the LA Angels, so they're the Los Angeles. They're the Angels, the Angels. But yeah, it's just the way that Umbrella went, like the Netflix series went about it. First off, the music was awesome.
Oh yeah, that scene that 5 has, I think either at the end of the first episode or the second, where he's fighting all the agents in the donut shop.
Yes.
To Istanbul.
Yes.
They might be giants. That scene is so good.
My other favorite scene with the music was right before Klaus gets kidnapped.
Yes. When
he's dancing around the house after having taken a bath. And he's like, everybody else is fighting, but he's just kind of, which is, I really liked that, the series version of Klaus versus the comic version of Klaus, because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That dude is a crazy ass junkie.
Yeah, this guy's much more sympathetic.
Right. Yeah. So, because, in the comics and the series, both versions, he does the drugs because it helps to temper his power.
Yes.
But in the comic, there's nothing likable about it. Like, there's even this whole part where he's helping some bikers, find some treasure, like some sort of valuable stuff, like someone's stash of valuable stolen goods or something like that. And there's nothing about him that I liked. He was an unforgivable character.
Yeah.
versus
the Netflix's.
Yeah, versus the Netflix one where you are rooting for Klaus and you love Klaus because he is fun.
Yeah.
And yes, he's a little bit of he's a junkie too, but he's a fun junkie.
Yeah, and you get it. Like, I don't know if the comics does a good enough job empathizing that character, where it's like, he's going through something none of us could possibly understand.
Right, and they kind of really play on that when he is kidnapped and then he goes through his withdrawals, so he starts seeing, like, the ghosts of the people that Hazel and Cha-Cha have killed.
So I like the idea that ghosts aren't bound by time.
Or location.
Yeah.
They're bound to the person who maybe, if they were murdered, so they were bound to that person.
If you're a time traveler and you kill someone in, like, the 1400s, their ghost is still going to be with you.
Right.
Even if you go further back in time.
Right.
The idea, like, you kill someone in the 1400s and then go back to 1200s, and their ghost is still like, you killed me 200 years from now, buddy.
Right. Like, yeah, and it's so, like, you get more of why Klaus is Klaus in that sense than versus when he's, I mean, just, in the comics, there's nothing about him that you can really care about. There's nothing redeeming about him. And then that whole bit about number 3 about Ben, not even touched on in the comics at all. Total blindsider for me. That was awesome. I loved that. Don't want to spoil too much in case you haven't watched it, but you should.
Well, we have been going for almost an hour at this point.
I just got one more.
One more.
That's all I have. Hellboy.
Yeah.
Hellboy. Okay. I love the comics. I enjoyed both movies, which I know some people didn't like the most recent movie. I'm talking about, even though there's 3 movies, I'm talking about
the difference between Guillermo del Toro's original.
Yes, and the most recent. One. Yes.
Yeah, the reboot.
I mean, even, like, both of those are valid. With David Harbour as...
thank you. I couldn't remember his last name.
You're welcome. I know. I saw the look on your face, and I'm like... You're
something.
Yeah. So, both of those, vastly different from each other. And then, even just from the comics, they're both vastly different. So, the first one, with Ron Perlman, love him, is based off of the Seeds of Destruction comic.
Yes.
And then, the other one is based off of basically everything else because Seeds of Destruction was done.
They're like, well, let's pull everything into this one.
Right. Well, you get a little bit of Hellboy in Mexico fighting some, vampires and
my only concern with that
luchadors. That was cool.
It's hard to try to adapt an entire comic run minus a part of it. It seems like it would be such a huge undertaking, and it would undercut your ability to tell that story.
Well, Seeds of Destruction was really the first one.
Yeah.
It's that first couple of comics put together, and then everything else came after it. And even then, the part of Seeds of Destruction that they took that inspiration from is rather a small part. Like, it's really not, like, they did a great job on expounding the story and keeping it within the, the idea. Yeah. But it was, like, everything else, you did a lot of other things with it. And that, it was fun. It was, like, Ron Perlman was a little more serious. Like, in that Ron Perlman way, because it's still Ron Perlman. So he still has fun with it. But it was very much its rating. It was that, PG-13 or whatever? Like, it wasn't very high.
It came out at a time versus now where you can make anything that's comic book into a movie at this point. It had to be able to stand on its own.
Exactly. You had to really...
Make people want to come in and see it.
Right. Whereas, like, the newer one with David Harbour, he was very much more along the lines of the comic book Hellboy, foul-mouthed, no shits given, like, he's just, things happen, and he's just like, well, would you look at that? Like, it was, I really enjoyed it, but all three of them from each other were very different. Like, you have some options out there if you're looking for something maybe less foul-mouthed and kind of awful, considering that whole fairy debacle.
One of the things I've noticed is from the little bit of Hellboy comics and side stories that I've seen or heard other people talk about, I always feel like Hellboy would work better as like
TV series. Yes,
exactly.
Yes, that's one of those ones. Yeah,
you take your time because Hellboy isn't a comic that's always just like action packed, and like it has moments that are slower and reflective. And the whole story is sort of Hellboy grappling and trying to live as much of a human life as he can with all this supernatural.
I feel like that's more of a feeling we get from the Ron Perlman ones.
Yeah,
in the actual comics, it's more just the supernatural things out there. Some of them are giant a-holes.
Yeah.
And he works with the Bureau, and he just kind of has a job to eliminate these things. I feel like there's less of him struggling to be like people. I don't know, maybe that's just from my reading of it. Because I've read all the way up to the first one of Hellboy in Hell. So if you disagree with me in any way, please let us know. Like, we want to hear these things. But from my reading of it, he cares less about what people think of him and more of like, I got a thing to do, guys.
Right.
Like, they're bad. I gotta deal with that. So, I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Maybe. Well, we try to wrap this on a pitch. I feel like we've already kind of done one here with Hellboy, talking about how we want to see it adapted. But it's actually been at least attempted to be adapted a couple times.
Right.
What is something that we haven't gotten a film for that you would love to see attempted but hasn't yet? Because I have one that an attempt was made and it flopped. And I have one that no attempt has been made, but I would be thrilled if I heard an attempt someone was trying to. And if someone isn't trying to, I will try to.
Well, I think we already know which one I would prefer to see adapted into a television series, so we could further explore those details. And that is, of course, the one I started with, which is Aragon.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really great complex world building involved that I feel like we don't get to see. And I feel like that would make a great television series.
Well, both of mine are ones I've talked about previously on this show. My first one I'll do pretty lightly because I've already talked about it at somewhat length. But the other one I only kind of casually mentioned. First one is my diehard go-to, which I'll never convince you to read because you won't. It's The Dark Tower.
I just haven't.
It's
the detailing.
Yeah, I know. This is why I said that. It's such an interesting, not what you'd expect from Stephen King's story about a man who essentially has to travel this sort of dark, dying multiverse in order to try to find the core of it.
Okay.
To restart it. To save it. And it just draws on everything from King's mythology. And I think the mistake that the Idris Elba reboot, although I still haven't watched it, if you heard me talking about it previously, I haven't watched it yet. I meant to watch it before I started talking about it again. It just happened to come up with this topic. The mistake of that is starting with the first book. As well, it's a decent jumping on place because you don't have to know too much to get started there. It should really get started either leveraging both that and Wizards of Glass at the same time, or just start with Wizards and Glass, get to know this character as a young man and let him grow into the role.
Right.
Which is why I'd love to see it as a TV series. There was a talk of doing Wizards and Glass if The Dark Tower went well. It didn't. So my TV series never happened. That was the one I was really excited for.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just this really big multiversal, like, journey.
Okay.
It's sort of, the arc of it sort of reminds me of Lord of the Rings, where instead of having a map where you point to, we have to go there, it's more like out there is the very core of the multiverse, essentially. And we have to go stop it from being corrupted because reality is beginning to crumble.
Okay.
And sort of like evil is festering in all these worlds. And what is good has sort of died, and Roland is this sort of last vestige of that good.
Okay.
Even if he himself isn't a good man.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good story. If you could ever put aside your dislike for Stephen's ramblings, and the first book is really short.
Okay.
And they get progressively thicker towards the middle, and then they actually, I think, toward the end they got a little smaller, and then the last book's super thick because he had to wrap it up. There are some weird bits in there. There's a part, I think the first 4 books are the best of the series, and then the last 3, it's just not quite the same. The reason for that is partially because that was right after Stephen King had this infamous accident where he got hit by a car while he was walking down the street close by his home. He was exercising and a car struck him. But also, he makes a lot of kind of weird choices, including making he himself a character in the story that Roland and the others talk to. And it's like, okay, I guess. I got to the end of that story. I finished it. I put it down. It has a great ending. And I was like, I really like the story, but I still don't get why that happened. Because it happens twice.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, it's only in like the last 3 books that it comes up. And like some big things happen tied to that. And it's just like, why did you make this big thing that had to happen also have to involve literally you? Literally part of the book where they have to go to him and convince him to finish writing the story.
Oh, okay.
Because he's not motivated to do it after the automobile accident, because somehow the automobile accident was tied to the bad guy's plan. That by from stopping King from writing the story, therefore it would halt the progress of Roland and the rest of the gang. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
Stephen, what? So that's that one. I said I was only going to briefly touch on it.
I know.
I touched on it. The other one I mentioned only a couple episodes ago, and that is the novel Hyperion.
Okay.
Which I touched on a little there, so I won't go into any big detail, but it's essentially another one I'd love to see as a series, which a group of people are assembled together to go on a quest. It's a pilgrimage across the planet Hyperion in order to meet with an entity known as the Shrike, which is said to grant one wish, essentially. Each of these characters have their own motivations for going, and they each have their own story, which is told over the course of this novel. So there'll be a chapter describing them landing on the planet and their journeys. And there's a lot of stress and pressure because there's there's the army of this galactic empire that all these people are citizens of versus a bunch of rebellious space barbarians, essentially.
Oh, okay.
And they're within days of them landing, it's expected that these outsiders will eclipse the posted army that's in that system. And so the planet is gonna fall. Everyone knows it's gonna happen. And so it's just there's panic on the streets and people trying to survive, and they're trying to get through that. But then each chapter between that is one of the characters telling their story. And they're super, I told a couple of them that were before. There's one of a former ruthless army general who was trained in a camp that when you dreamt, you'd go through simulations of famous battles of history.
Okay.
And it'd almost be like a first-person shooter where they put you on the ground and you fight the battles. But in each of these simulations, he keeps getting rescued by a woman. And they go on to just slaughter together. And so he builds this relationship with this AI woman. He doesn't know why she exists. She's not part of the programming as far as he knows, but she's always there.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually she tells him to come to Hyperion.
Oh, okay.
So he graduates, he goes out, he has this very successful military career, where he's just known as this like ruthless tyrant. He's like killing hundreds and thousands of these space barbarian people, but then eventually gets leave to go down to Hyperion to go track and see if he can find this woman, and it's revealed that the woman is the Shrike.
Okay.
And that she transforms into this, like, think like a suit of armor made of like, I imagine it like iron, like thorns.
Okay.
And so there's like nowhere on this armor you can touch without it cutting you, and it transforms in his arms. And he's so horrified that this object of his obsession, this woman who he's been fighting with, the whole reason he's gotten so good at war was this horrible monster,
right?
Who wants it to like join with him and like, you know, be this terrible murderer. That he immediately goes back and like disavows everything that he's done and is now like a complete pacifist and like speaks out against war. And he's become like the total opposite. But his reputation as a warrior is still greater than his new reputation at trying to undo the sins that he's done. And it's just little things like that it's a really interesting storytelling. Mm-hmm. And then stories about journeys are always fun. And the opportunity to do some really weird things. Like the Shrike is known during specific seasons to just like show up and kill people. Like he'll just pass judgment, but you don't know why. You don't know why he'll do it. He'll just show up and just like, because he's a fucking metal person, put his hand through you and you die, and then he just teleports out of there and you're like, was that a bad person? A good person? I don't know. So you can go into the history of it. There's a whole city of poets that lived on, like the city's called Keats, like John Keats.
Oh, okay.
And that everyone there died except for one character who's one of the guys who's on the journey. Okay. The pilgrimage. And it's just a really bizarre, weird story. And I'd love to see it adapted. It'd be really cool.
Right. Alrighty then.
Yeah, that's our episode. Our, my goodness, almost hour-long episode. Probably will be an hour by the time I put the music on and everything. But go ahead, let us know, what do you think, what is a story you'd love to see adapted, but don't think ever will? What movies are better than the books? What books are better than the movies? Where were we wrong? Let us know, and we'll see you guys next week with a retcon. We'll make an announcement at the beginning of one of these episodes.
Alright, bye!
Hey everybody, this is Nate again. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Just a couple things I wanted to remind you of before I let you go for the week. Next week, we are indeed doing our retcon episode. I talked about it at the very beginning, but just in case you skipped over it or somehow forgot, it's going to be on the Santa Claus 3. It will be interesting because it's not a film series I'm super familiar with, but it's something that Cheyenne is instead, so I'll be really curious to get her responses to this film. Also, my own observations should be interesting as well. Otherwise, I just wanted to fill you in on nonessentialmedia.com, which is this podcast home as well as home of other podcasts we have going, including Lifecast and Beach City Crows. You guys really over this next year should be keeping a close eye on that. We're going to be launching new podcasts, improving what's already there. haven't already, go check it out. Go listen to those other shows. They're really funny, particularly Lifecast, which I've been on a few times. It's an absolute blast. But I'll let you guys go. Everyone have a good one, and we will see you guys next week.